welcome to the Frontline Club. My name's Rob Gifford. I'm the London correspondent of National Public Radio and have been since 2005. And before that, I was 6 years as the NPR correspondent in Beijing. So I've sort of covered Asia a bit, but not really covered Burma in any detail. So I'll be asking the dumb questions that we all want to ask. Let me just introduce you to our panel. One of our panel is on his way here. Perhaps I'll introduce him because he'll walk in 1 minute's time. On my left, Justin Wintle, who is an author of many books, some about Southeast Asia, most recently a biography of Aung San Suu Kyi entitled Perfect Hostage. And next to him is Twin Jodzo, who is a journalist with the BBC World Service Burmese section, born in Rangoon. He came to London to study at UCL. He has a postgraduate degree from the London School of Economics as well. On my right is Zoya Pan, who was born in Burma, also born in the Karen state in eastern Burma. At aged 14, she fled her home village when the Burmese military moved in and fled to Thailand, from where she came with other members of her family to Britain, and she now works for the Burma Campaign UK. The empty seat belongs to Jonathan Miller, who is with Channel 4 News. I think he's just been on air, so he's rushing over here. He has also been involved with Burma for some 20 years, covering Burma in the aftermath of the 1988 demonstrations and through the 90s for the BBC, and most recently from Bangkok in September for Channel 4. So we are going to be discussing, we're also going to be joined on the telephone in a moment, I think, by Khin Maung Win, who is with the Democratic Voice of Burma in Oslo. And the way we'll do this, I think, is I'm going to speak to Khin Maung Win on the telephone just for ask a couple of questions about how they were covering what happened in September in Burma. We're going to start off the whole discussion then here on the panel, speaking about the demonstrations. And then we're going to open it up a little bit more broadly on the panel to talk about some of the big issues surrounding Burma and what's going on there and where we think that things might go in future. So, and then at that point we'll open it up for questions from the audience, probably by about 8:30. So. Okay.
Hello.
Hello there. Is that Khin Maung Win?
Yes, Khin Maung speaking.
Hello there. It's Rob Gifford here at the Frontline Club in London, and an audience of about some 40 people all listening to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, but not very loud. I have to listen carefully.
Okay, I'll try and speak clearly, and we can hear you just about okay. Everyone hear that okay? Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us from Oslo. We're having a discussion, as you know, about the demonstrations that occurred in Burma in September. And obviously the Democratic Voice of Burma in Oslo is a very important player in the whole coverage of the Burma issue. Perhaps I can just begin by asking you, Maung, about when the demonstrations first happened, what you thought. Did you feel that we were going to be going into another 1988 situation when you saw the monks come out on the streets?
Yes, firstly, when we saw demonstrations in August, mid-August, we did not really think, that might become another 1988 demonstration, because the repression in the country is so enormous, very high, and then people are very scared. But that immediately turned into 1988 situation when the Buddhist monks joined the demonstration. But frankly speaking, at the beginning, we are not that aware the demonstration will become 88.
Right, and so as the demonstrations started to unfold, obviously you're looking to cover this story as journalists and as Burmese journalists on the outside. What exactly did you do? What can you do? Can you tell us a little bit about just about the logistics of covering such a sensitive topic when you are outside Burma?
You know, even though we are based outside of Burma, maybe 5,000, 6,000 kilometers from Burma, living in Oslo, but you know, we have a lot of journalists, singers on the ground. You know, all together in DDG, we have more than 100 people. Half of them are inside Burma. Of course, they cannot function like a normal journalist like you are doing, but they all have to work undercover. So what I want to say is that we have a lot of people, journalists, who are very committed to taking risks to cover what is going on in the country.
And how does it work? You call them up, I mean, you're using their mobile phones. There's a big change, of course, since 1988, and that is the complete transformation in telecommunications. That must have completely changed how you covered it, who you spoke to, but also there's the danger of mobile phones being traced by the government as well. How did you deal with that issue?
That exactly, yeah. Firstly, you know, the technology. The new technology is the major factor that made the difference between 1988 and 2007. And it's the internet, and the phone, and you know, even the landline. These are you know, the technology we use for our coverage. But of course, the military government, they monitor our communication systems. They even reduce or even cut off totally the internet communication system. And many of our telephones were jammed or maybe even blocked. But we realized such situation will come if there is big demonstration. So, you know, we also have our own plan, our own investment in our own system. That's why, you know, when the international media, including CNN, BBC, or other big media, could not get the footage, we still could manage to get the footage because of our own investment. So we anticipate the military government will cut off all the communication. But maybe the media again in the near future if similar things happen. But we have our own data system.
And how do you see, in the sense of covering Burma, of course we do have this telecommunications revolution. Do you think that, of course, there's been a lot of hype about how the internet is changing, the way these countries live and the way that they're monitored and the access to information. Do you personally, it very much affects how you connect with your audience and how you interview your reporters in the country? Do you think that really the internet and this telecommunications revolution is going to carry on transforming Burma, or is it something that the government can contain?
I know the military government, like in many dictatorship governments in Africa as well, you know, they always trying to control information outflow or also information coming into the country. But you know, the situation is out of their control. You know, for their own sake, for their own economic reasons, they have to open up this you know, communication channel. So the development in technology and communication technology makes the difference. For example, in 1988, there is no such communication and technology. So they can kill up to 3,000 demonstrators. At the time, only very, very few people from outside the world know how many people were killed in Burma. But on this time, of course, maybe we estimate up to 200 people were killed, less number compared to 1988. But the international community were informed about what is going on in the country because of the communication technology. Of course, the government will always control these things, but it is out of their control.
And just finally, Mong, then one more question. As a question, obviously, we're going to be debating here this evening. Having seen what happened over the last couple of months and having seen what happened eventually and how it was suppressed in many ways in a similar way to 20 years ago, How do you feel? How optimistic do you feel about the road ahead and the years ahead, or the months ahead, and whether this could start to boil up again, or if it's really very much under control of the junta in Burma?
I don't think they are no longer control because the communication technology creates very good awareness worldwide, and the international community is closely monitoring what is going on in the country. And then, they are trying to hide what they have been doing last 20 years. But, today's world is very open. Now, even though they want to close the whole country, but it is impossible. So, because of all this development in communication, internet, and all these things, that that will be for positive change. And if we all are living maybe 20 years or so, maybe they are in a position to control. But because of this new technology and opening up of the, everything, so they can no longer control. So there must be a change for for the growth for democracy, and country must be open.
Okay, thank you. Khin Maung Win from the Democratic Voice of Burma, thank you very much for joining us from Oslo. Thank you very much. Well, let's go to Johnny Miller. Last in, first on. You were in Bangkok, I believe, during September. Tell us a little bit, first of all, about how you at Channel 4 covered this story, how you personally did it, and how the channel covered it.
Well, the reason I went out to Bangkok was we had a correspondent inside Burma. This correspondent remained anonymous throughout his time in the country. This was for his own protection largely, and he still has to remain anonymous today, unfortunately. He was able to smuggle out of the country, I think I'm right in saying, 3 films, and he did numerous voice reports and Q&As with our studio. And the reason I went out to Bangkok was to, he was doing the eyewitness stuff on the ground, and I was able, courtesy of DVB and others, to take what other footage was available, do stuff in Bangkok and Mae Sot, and meet defectors or those who had fled across the border, and put together a bigger picture take on what was going on inside. Now, for me, it was a bizarre experience, because in another incarnation about 10 years ago, I was based in Bangkok and covered a lot of Burma, and went inside myself several times, and I was alarmed at how seamlessly, as a correspondent, I was able to sort of fit back in, because it seemed like sort of Groundhog Day. Nothing had changed, except the fact that, of course, with the advent of all this digital technology and this proliferation of internet technology and imagery coming out, there were these absolutely phenomenal new sources of information. For those on the ground inside, it was exactly as it was when I had been going in and out in the mid-90s. And they were all taking the same precautions. They were steering clear of military intelligence or special branches, it's now been redubbed, and taking care with the identity of those that they talked to, and all the same concerns still held true. But there was this whole new thing made available through the internet, through fantastic, this website Irrawaddy, which has been instrumental in getting pictures and reports out. I think I'm right in saying that 43 million people visited that site in about a 9-day period, and it actually crashed the site. And it was absolutely extraordinary what we were able to access in Bangkok.
But as we saw in the end, it didn't succeed in anything really. It was suppressed. I mean, what's your take on the question of how this new information is or can transform the way that politics is done in Burma?
I think, as our DVB friend was just saying there, there has been a sea change since the big demos in 1988. In that so little footage actually managed to make its way out of the country in those days. It was impossible for the world to really know what went on, and that has changed. There were live reports being done. There was this, citizen reporters, were, as they were dubbed, I think, were increasingly adding to what traditional foreign correspondents were able to do. In fact, the role of the foreign correspondent has, to some degree, been superseded by the sheer proliferation of people inside. I'm painting myself out of job here, but you know, there are so many new sources of information coming out, and very courageous reporting, a lot of picture sources, that I think it really has changed. Whether or not that in itself will impact the way the politics pan out and the stranglehold that the generals still have on the country, I'm not so sure. I do think that they've managed to contain it for now, and you know, there's still a lot of debate, I understand, inside Burma itself as to what to do next. You know, whether there should be continued civil disobedience, whether it should be wait and see to see what ASEAN or the UN comes up with.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. Twin Jorzoy, you're at the BBC. What's your abiding memory of covering from here the demonstrations that went on? What were the things that really struck you and the differences? You were inside Burma in 1988 as a teenager, I believe.
Okay. Well, the DVB man correctly noted the opening up of the technology facilitated flow of news from the inside the country. But we also have to give credit to the bravery of the citizens. I mean, I could give you one example. On the 26th or 27th of September, the night where the first monastery was raided in downtown Rangoon, and the monastery was raided at about 2 a.m. in the morning, and about 1 a.m. in the morning. But then we received calls from about 2 or 3 different places, one from Sri Lanka, Thailand, and one from inside the country itself, telling us that the monastery has been surrounded. And so then it's very easy for us to do what it's we know what to do next. Then what we got to do is we just have to find the numbers in the neighborhood and try to get the confirmation, or we can send one of our stringers or informal suppliers of news. It could be our relatives, or one of the relatives, or it could be one of our friends, because there's like Burmese society has a strong social network, and which made it easier to in this case to collect the news, to confirm the news. So we can send it informally, and then get the confirmation. So it was incredible, because we were so it's about 2 a.m. and we got it about an hour later, and it was just incredible and I was so lucky to have been able to walk in that night, and I was able to cover that rate in great detail.
And that has really changed. I'm sure that's, of course, much faster than 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Zoya
yes.
Pan, you, of course, we all know that the BBC, the DVB, the VOA traditionally have been a hugely important source of information inside Burma. Is there a sense in which, with the new internet and with more information coming in, that they are somehow less important, with Irrawaddy, with BurmaNet, with some of the other websites? Do you think that the outside, the traditional routes of information are less important, or are they still very much relied on within Burma?
Well, people in Burma, they listen to Exile Media's group. And for example, they do not listen to the state media because they do not trust the state media. So traditionally they listen to BBC Burmese, VOA Burmese, and DVB and other exile media. So this time I think it is very important that we give credit to media's companies that provide information. And many of them, they have contacts that risk their life giving out information. For example, the moment when at the beginning of the protest started from very few hundred numbers, we gave the briefing and we gave information to media groups and also politicians, and especially UK Parliament and the European Union. And we tried to facilitate more information to get out from within Burma and to the world, because people in Burma, they really, really want to give information to make sure that the world know what is happening in Burma, although risking their life. And this is important that international community pay enough attention to Burmese people who show their courage and give up their energy, their lives, took up to the street and demand for change. Because this recent peaceful protest is so significant. It is not like the previous one in 1988. It involved various parts of the society in Burma, including democracy activists, NLD youth members, labor activists, and Buddhist monks, and later on joined with artists and celebrities. This kind of thing we don't normally see in Burma. So for a moment, the regime lose their iron grip on the population in Burma. And that was the moment when the people in Burma overcome fear, because for a long time they've been ruled by the regime that ruled the country with power and fear. But this is time for the people to show up their courage.
And I want to talk specifically in a moment about the breadth of the demonstrations and how many different areas of society took part. Just before I ask Justin, we move on from the actual logistics of covering the demonstration. There were a couple of people, I think, in the audience who were in close contact also during the demonstrations, who spoke to people very closely. In the front row here, I think. Can we just hear a few more stories, perhaps, of just people who you were talking to on a regular basis and what they were saying?
I would like to add that indeed you didn't finish completely your story, but yes, what I got a sense of people that the situation for them in Rangoon had really changed suddenly, because they overcome their fear. Not only that, but there was a sort of feeling of solidarity between people, which they hadn't sensed for a long time. They, because of this long-term regime, nobody trusted each other anymore. But coming out on the street together, it created a sense of solidarity, and people were saying, don't think that reacting to stories they had heard on the radio, don't think that it's back to normal. It's not. We feel now connected to each other in a way that we haven't felt for a long time, and they can't take that away from us. And it, of course, some sort of small little signs of civil disobedience came out after that, and they were maybe not that significant, but significant for people to keep hope and to keep in that the momentum hadn't been lost. Like I heard the story of people had put pictures of Tan Shui around the necks of street dogs. Tan Shui is the general who is the leader of the junta. And soldiers were running after these dogs to arrest them. That story went around and it just cheered up people.
And I saw the picture of it, actually.
Black humour. Let me just ask Justin Wintle, because you've been watching Burma for a long time. Thank you very much. When the demonstrations first broke out and you saw them, did you think this was it, or this is really going to be something big, and the people you were talking to, or were you actually thinking this is never going to succeed?
I was a pessimist, really. First of all, I didn't see the demonstrations firsthand. I was in Bangkok, like you at the time, with some old Burma hand correspondents. And there was an excitement, and people were saying it's going to happen this time. And it's easy to be wise in hindsight and all that, but I, on record, of saying at the time that I didn't think that it was going to happen this time. It's quite interesting. All the things that you guys have been saying is very interesting about the media, so I'll come back to that in a moment, if I may. There is a story that, of course, this latest failed uprising started because of the fuel price hikes on August the 15th. And by about the 19th, there were civilian demonstrations going on, protests going on in Rangoon, possibly Mandalay, possibly elsewhere. One of the shortcomings of the enhanced media coverage, if you like, is that we still have an extremely patchy idea of what was going on in such places as Moulmein, Prome, etc. One of the stories that came out was that the very first protest groups were actually people who were walking to work together because they couldn't afford the transport anymore. So you got blue-collar workers, white-collar workers going in fairly small groups. And that's the story, and I can't confirm that, but it's interesting that that the junta, in a way, sort of shot itself in the foot. It scored an own goal. It actually created these sort of, if that story is true, then it created these rather fictional protests, which then became real protests. And then the tipping point, of course, was on September the 5th, when soldiers shot above the heads of some monks outside Mandalay at Pokoku, was it?
No shooting in Bakoku, but
Pokoku?
Well, the shooting actually took place in Rangoon, but the Bakoku was where the first mistreatment of the monks.
Right.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, that day, around that date, was the real tipping point, and then and then the monks came out. But if you compare it with 1988, you have to say that eventually, by about September the 26th, when the shooting started in real, there actually were thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of protesters on Burmese streets, but there were not hundreds of thousands. And I think that one reason for that was, although it was almost 20 years ago, there was still a memory of that ghastly time in 1988. And fear is the condition of political and social life in Burma. I also think it's interesting about the monks that the best estimates I've had is that about 20% of the Sangha came out in different parts of Burma at different times to protest. And then there was the daily walk, the March of the Monks from the Shui Dagon in Rangoon, Yangon, whatever you like to call it, downtown to the Sule Pagoda. Maybe if 80% of the monks had come out, it really would have changed things. But a lot of monks actually stayed inside the monasteries, and although they're fantastically brave young monks particularly, the average age of the monks who were protesting was by and large, with some notable exceptions, quite young.
That's a good point. Do you think that the spirit of 1988 has filtered down, Johnny, to the younger generation? Of course, we saw the monks, and that was a crucial element and a different element to the demonstrations. But young people generally, are they as mobilized, as motivated to get out there on the streets as they were before?
My sense was that the young generation just is really pissed off. That they've got more access to, more knowledge of what it is like elsewhere, not inside Burma, and they want change. The fuel price hikes, the monks coming out, the seeming spontaneity of all of that coincided. There was a serendipity, I suppose, to what happened. I think the 88 generation was absolutely crucial to how this happened, my understanding of it. I mean, they were very much behind this latest uprising, and I think they have inspired this much younger generation, who are the ones who are sort of internet savvy as well, people who know how to use proxy servers to get emails out and receive messages in, and there certainly is, I think, among the younger generation, something which is not just, it's not going to go away. Just the clampdown, I mean, there have been so many cycles of repression followed by relaxation, followed by repression, that it's hard to, I mean, it's impossible to second guess what may now happen, but there is still, I think, this fundamental total discontent which has not been addressed.
Right, and we heard the phrase back to normal. No, it's not back to normal. Yes,
oh,
what
yeah,
do you want to
yes.
add to that? And the fact that again, the monks were suppressed. I mean, surely that was a crucial point, that not only did they come out, but then the military said, we don't care that they're monks, we're actually going to suppress this.
Well, the events are not just the part of the history, but also part of the product of history. And I don't think I'm too arrogant to say that we are somewhere expecting this sort of demonstrations, is going to happen sooner or later. It could happen for any reason. I mean, in '74, it happened because of the treatment of the UN, the funeral of the UN Secretary General event. But it quickly led to the anti-government demonstrations. And also in 1988, I mean, what it started as a T-shirt brawl, became a wider demonstration. Also this time here, what it started as a hike in the issue of price rise quickly led to the anti-government demonstrations, because what we are seeing is the consciousness of marginalization shared among all the not only the ordinary dissidents, but also the ordinary citizens who were not part of the military government project. But they were pushed outside, and this consciousness of marginalization shared among all these dissidents. I mean, this consciousness reinvigorates the strength of opposition each time these sort of demonstrations happen. And also in 1980, what happened is, I mean, we've got the 1990 election, which I see and many people see as the fruit of the 1988 uprising, and the government had to call the election, and because of the election, the NLD won the landslide victory, and because of that victory in the 1990 election, the NLD was able to stand as a political party, and
that's obviously not going to happen again. They're not going to do anything like that.
But now what happened is, since 2003, the military juntas are the project is twofold. One is the unilateral pursuit of what they call the 7-step roadmap plan, and the second thing is the elimination of the NLD, which possibly include Aung San Suu Kyi. I mean, this is a project since 2003. I mean, since some of you might remember the purge of the entire military intelligence unit in 2003, and so this is the project, and this demonstrations in September somehow halted the project. So they got to make the concession of appointing a minister to. I mean, even if it's superficially,
right, and allowing in the UN,
that's right.
That's came in to speak as well.
And they can't just let this event washed away. I mean, they got to do something.
But how worried are they, Zoya? I mean, how worried do you think they are? The generals, yes.
Well, for a moment, as I said, the regime lost their power over the population in Burma. And at the same time, because of the international pressure from outside the world, and then the regime, for a moment, they open up the way, like they are pretending they would like to talk. And then they allowed UN Special Envoy, Mr. Ibrahim Kimbari, to go into Burma and talk with some of the members of the general, and had a chance to speak to Aung San Suu Kyi. But actually, they were talking about talkings. There hasn't been any single democratic reform since UN envoys go back and forth from Burma in 1990. So what we need to see is action. And the UN Security Council released a presidential statement calling for the regime to release all political prisoners, including the democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi, and then stop human rights violations against civilians. But the regime literally gets away with this, and the regime showed no sign to engage with the UN. That's why we've been calling for international community to combine both targeted economic sanctions and political pressure together, and then force the regime to enter into a negotiating table. As we see the images and the video footage coming out from the country, on the televisions, this kind of thing happen every day in the part of Burma where I come from.
But you mentioned the presidential statement from the United Nations. There was one important difference with that presidential statement, that China did not veto it. Am I right? And so
That's right.
surely that, is that, Justin, is that not a big change in how the internet, China is a crucial player? Let's sort of broaden this out a little bit to look at the broader diplomatic United Nations linking in with the Burmese situation. How significant do you think that that is?
Well, China is of the essence of this whole thing, I think. China and Burma have developed since 1990 a very close trading relationship. The Tatmadaw, the Burmese armed forces, gets arms from a variety of sources, including Israel, Russia, Pakistan, but by far and large, main supplier is China. China gets timber and gems, and it's going to get a lot of gas, and the plan at the moment is to build a deep sea port outside Rangoon so that China can bring oil in from the Middle East without having to go through the Straits of Malacca, which could always be closed off, as happened during the Second World War by the Japanese. So strategically, Burma is of incredible importance.
But here they are not vetoing
to China. Now, I think that what's happening is that it's been affected to a certain extent by the upcoming Beijing Games, which China is very, very keen to be seen as the good boy by the so-called international community, which to me is a completely meaningless phrase, by the way. So China wants to be seen doing the right thing, but there are terminological difficulties, which is to say, when China says order should be restored in Burma and it makes noises about democracy, I would have thought that China is pretty supportive of the roadmap to democracy and that seven-step roadmap to democracy, because that conforms to the Chinese pattern. What is so interesting about the whole thing is that the Western camp, by which I mean America principally, then EU and Great Britain, have a completely schizophrenic foreign policy towards China and Burma. On the one hand, we have full economic engagement with China, and that seems to be working slightly. I mean, China is changing. You do get civil rights groups allowed to do things, sometimes at a local level. Certainly the living standards have changed on the seaboard, out of all recognition from Mao times. And towards Burma, we pursue this punitive and ineffectual sanctions program.
A very crucial point, which I'd like to put to Zoya. Let me put that to you first of all, because I think you're going to, and then we'll come back to you, Twain. Why should we continue to have sanctions against Burma? China has been transformed by engagement.
Is being very slowly.
Is being transformed.
Well, you mentioned that China has been transformed. Actually, it is a political game that China always plays.
Oh, yeah.
And there, as I mentioned earlier, there hasn't been any democratic reform in Burma. So what we need to see is a UN Security Council Biden resolution on Burma set up a deadline forcing the regime to release all political prisoners, including Aung San Suu Kyi. If the regime is serious about democratic reform, the first thing they need to do is release all political prisoners and have a genuine democratic reform. And at the moment, as we know, China is one of the arms supplier to the regime, and not only arms supplier but also interested in economic and politics. Even in UN Security Council in January, China voted against used veto power against resolution against the regime in Burma. That's why we need to see China to completely, if China care about human rights and democracy, it should use its influence on the people's side of Burma.
But Zoya, with respect, you didn't answer the question there. The question is the different approach of the Western community towards China and towards Burma. You support sanctions, I believe. Why? I mean, there's no sanctions against China. China is being transformed by engagement. Why would you support? Clearly, many people say sanctions have simply not worked with Burma. So let's try something else, engage with them, allow investment, and allow that peaceful evolution that the Chinese call it to spread throughout Burma as well. Why not do that?
Well, the suggestion that sanction has been tried and failed is so far from the truth. We have a real sanction just on Monday this week, where the European Union updated their common position on Burma. They ban on investments and imports of gems and timber and metals. This is what Burmese people have been calling for many years, and we just got it on Monday. So how can you say that sanction has been tried and failed? We got it Monday, and today is Thursday.
Let me just bring Tune in. Okay, what do you say
I'm
to
also
this?
going to say
the China
sanctions. Yes, well, I mean, what I got to say is, this is a logic here. It rains, it is wet. It doesn't rain, it could still be wet for some other reason. So sanction, no change. No sanction, you can't really conclude that there will be change because all they have the argument against the sanctions is the sanction doesn't make the society change, but also, and also comparison with the China. I think the Chinese leadership and these military leadership are well, in terms of competent, it pulls apart. I mean, I think the Chinese have the entrepreneurial skill, but I don't see. We have yet to see a similar attitude. The friendliness to the businesses, and also the. We don't really see that the government is really opening up, and that they have created the conducive atmosphere for the businesses. Because I mean, look at the first of all, look at the legal jurisdiction here. I mean, we don't have the law to protect the private property. I mean, you can say that China has the law protecting the private property only quite recently, but in Burma, you can't have the freehold lands. You can't have, law protecting the enjoyment of your own private property. Protect, okay. and that sort of legal framework is also lacking. And so I'm not totally gang or for against the sanctions, but I don't think the people blame sanctions for the failure and failure to bring the democratic reforms in Burma. But I think it's a bit unfair, and yes, there are sanctions. And
so are you pro or anti?
What I can say is, it's agnosticism is quite self-defeating. But what I've got to say is, okay, sanctions probably have no war, but there's no guarantee that if there's no sanction, the engagement will work. Right. But also there's also another argument for not supporting sanctions. Very briefly, yes. Yeah. I mean, but what they can do is that they could borrow money from the IMF, and there's no guarantee that they could arrange another, a lucrative wedding for one of their daughters again. I mean, there's no guarantee of such thing happening, and these IMF loans certainly, will have to be paid for by the future generation of the Burmese people.
Justin, what's your take on this?
Well, my colleague here made this sort of point about land titles in China, and that is an example of how things are changing there. But I also take Zoya's point that maybe we shouldn't say sanctions have failed because they've never really been tried. I mean, they've actually been in place since 1966. Well, some sanctions have been in place since 1966, first of all Clinton and then etc. But the point is that unless sanctions can be applied universally, bringing China and India, particularly ASEAN countries on board, they will never work. Not only because those trading relationships will continue to expand, but also because in that region there's a whole pattern of rogue trading. And I mean, just the way, for example, amphetamines. Methamphetamines have been traded, and opium, and heroin, all those things, timber, gems. There's a whole pattern that is uncontrollable, and I don't think that sanctions, even if they were universally applied, would necessarily affect things. But my basic view is I'm not terribly anti-sanctions, just in the same way that I'm not pro-sanctions. They can be used in principle. They're basically a neutral instrument of policy, and they can be applied for both, with both positive and negative results.
But
So,
meanwhile,
but they haven't worked. So my feeling is at the moment, let's think outside that box.
Try
let's
something else.
contemplate.
Can I just-
Johnny,
let's
yeah,
contemplate something
Well,
else.
let me just say a word on that. I mean, for all the reasons that you mentioned, I believe that there is an old Burmese saying, which is that when China spits, Burma swims. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it is true, it does actually say a lot, because I think China has spat. I think there has been a move. I think you mentioned the UN Security Council letter. I think China, from my understanding, has been moving behind the scenes and has been putting pressure to allow Gambari to go in. You can argue till the cows come home as to his usefulness, and Pinheiro's too, but there was a meeting, there was dialogue, the beginnings of dialogue set up. On the sanctions front, there has been forever this argument as to whether constructive engagement as proposed by ASEAN works. It hasn't. Or sanctions as a blunt instrument work. They haven't particularly. But what I do think is possibly going to work is this very, very targeted, smart sanctions idea, pinning or homing in on people who do business with the generals. Looking, the Americans are saying, well, look, to the Singaporean financial services companies, if you do business with these guys, we won't do business with you.
They're just transferred to Hong Kong, which is
Well,
under Chinese control now.
Okay. Well, maybe that would...
briefly, yeah.
Briefly, okay, I will give you one example why Burmese democracy movement are calling for sanctions. When I was just 14 years old, my village was attacked by Burmese army's soldiers as part of their policy of ethnic cleansing. And I am from ethnic Karen, and we had to flee, carrying few things on our back, and as children we were crying, hiding in the jungle, and we had very little food and no shelter. At the same time, a British trade delegation died in Rangoon, and they were making business deals with the regimes that had just ordered their army to attack and slaughter my people. And when I came here, we ended up in refugee camp in Thailand. I grew up in refugee camp, and then I came over here with the scholarship to study, and I came to know about this. And then regarding sanctions that has been tried in 1996, this was not smart sanctions. Like we'll see the European unions when they imposed commerce position on Burma, they banned investment investment in state-owned enterprise, which is very illegal in Burmese law anyway, so it doesn't happen. And they banned Burma generals within their list not to visit UK.
If you look at the ordinary Burmese people, though, I went there on vacation. You can boom and hiss me for that if you want. I went there on holiday 2 years ago because I simply wanted to see for myself, and it's just, and I went from China, sorry to prolong the China comparison, but I was just blown away by the poverty. Now, I'm just walking along, there are not even cars, there's no motor transport or anything, there's nothing. And you just kind of think, hold on a second, so we can go on sort of feeling good about ourselves in the West, that we're doing something that seems morally right because for reasons that has happened to your family. And I'm not saying, obviously I don't want to play down that, it's monstrous what is happening, but is it really sanctions, is it really helping the ordinary guy on the streets in Rangoon?
Because Justin also said that the sanctions is not universally applied, but that's true. But there is a heavy, if not heavy, substantial investment by the ASEAN nations and China. But then, do we see any evidence that these investment, these engagement policies bring any fruit?
And you think probably they don't?
No.
Right.
There's a very interesting thing which I saw today somewhere, that possibly one of the of the outcomes of sanctions is that without us, as it were, going in and setting up factories, etc., the Burmese economy has focused on exporting raw materials, which may then be assembled into goods by Burmese economic refugees in Thailand. for example. And there are people who, and it's very hard to interpret the evidence exactly, but it's arguable at least that sanctions have hurt the ordinary Burmese people far more than the soldiers at the top, who can always find ways around the trees.
Before we, let me just bring one more thing in, and then I think when we have questions, I think we can come back to the sanctions issue, because I think there's a sort of, you can just bat it back and forth forever. The question of the lady herself, Aung San Suu Kyi, known internationally, admired internationally. She has met with the generals since this all happened in September. She has met with the UN envoy as well. Do we see anything going on there? We've had this stalemate, this standoff for 18, 17 years. Is there anything going on? And should there be? Could there be? Could there be compromise? Could there be something more that she could be doing? Because obviously the generals are not going to give anything that could somehow bring some kind of compromise to the political scene. Johnny?
I don't think so, frankly, because we've seen it all before. There's been a bit of give, and then a bit of take, and a bit of give, and a bit of take, and then eventually she'll be sort of put under house arrest again. I think there were significant small moves made that could be sort of read like tea leaves watching MRTV broadcasts, which showed pictures of Daw Suu Kyi, which referred to her actually as Aung San Suu Kyi, which was significant because it, you know,
used her father's name.
However, I don't think, from my personal perspective, I feel as if I've seen it all before. I don't sense any move that will give Suu Kyi the mandate which she won in 1990.
Anyone more optimistic
well,
than that?
I think the role of China has been kind of overestimated. Yes, on the diplomatic front, yes, China, and now even more importantly Russia, possibly give the Burmese government a diplomatic shield. But on the material side, I think the Singapore could be more important, because some of you might be aware that the North Korea agreed to talk to come back to the six-party talk after the United States frozen the North Korean assets in Macau, and I think that really worried North Korean government, and I think it could. I mean, like, because of the Singapore is where these generals and their wives and the families go shopping, do the business, keep their money, possibly in Dubai as well. But they don't keep their mony in Chinese banks.
So more pressure from ASEAN, you're saying?
I mean, if it's possible. I mean, but I'm not too hopeful. Or,
and on the Suu Kyi question, are you hopeful? Do you think there's any possibility, or are we just at a complete stalemate?
Well, I agree to some extent that there's no, let's say, evidence or ground to be optimistic at this point, because they just appointed a minister, and they just made a few meetings, but nothing substantial dialogue has started. Right. So we can't say anything.
That's a fairly pessimistic summary. Sorry, one final point, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah. Okay, regarding Aung San Suu Kyi, we've seen this in the past in 1996, where the regime released Aung San Suu Kyi briefly because of international pressure, and the regime tried to buy the time and to stop pressure from international community, released Aung San Suu Kyi briefly and talking about talkings, and again in 2001. Released Aung San Suu Kyi again and talkings about talkings, but there hasn't been any actual reform in Burma. We need to see the statements from the UN transferred into resolution, and we need to see action that will force the regime to enter into genuine dialogue. Aung San Suu Kyi and her party has always been willing to talk and to negotiate, to compromise. But it is the regime that refused to talk to Aung San Suu Kyi and her party. So we need the combination of targeted economic sanction. Listen carefully, it is targeted economic sanction. It's not a blanket sanction that targets civilians. It targets the regime where it will hurt them the most, in their pocket, in gems, timber, and metal. And the EU also looking into the banking ban on banking and financial transactions, and also companies that cover insurance in the companies that involved with Burmese regime. So it is very essential that the UN Security Council also pass a binding resolution and have multilateral, the UN arms embargo against the regime in Burma.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Shall we just open it out for questions now? Feel free, if you, even if perhaps if you were there during August and September.
There's actually a guy from Generation 88 students here, and it'd be really
Right.
wonderful if you could tell us
Well,
something
if
about
you-
what you were originally saying about Generation 88.
If you have personal experience, please do stand up and tell us a little bit about it, or if you have a question for one of our panelists, please stand up and take the microphone and ask as well. Yes, at the back there. Is this the chap?
Next to him.
No.
Hi, I do think
You may not wish to be
I do have
identified.
a question actually. I've got comments to make. Is that okay?
Sure, if you want to make very brief comments, please.
I do agree with John Miller through and throughout everything you said.
Nice
On the
one.
ground in Burma, everything remains the same in terms of traditional reporting. What we saw a few weeks ago about on blogs, all these pictures emerging out, is quite interesting. It's unique. It's great, but it's not the thing. It's not the ultimate liberation in Burma. But you've spoken about technology and like superb, but they still manage to crack down. They still manage to sort of oppress people despite of those technology. But the reporting on that technology was overhyped. I'm sorry to say that, especially BBC News 24 and BBC World Television. They hyped it up to an extent. I was there when they were interviewing Gotai, the blogger from London. They were asking all these sensitive questions like, how do you do it? How many people are there? How many contacts have you got? An intelligence agency should be able to pick these things out, just like that, within a click of a finger, through a process of elimination. So what I really want to say is that internet is not that big hoo-ha. As Jonathan Miller said, proxy server was used, and it is still used. What they did, they actually closed the tab. Now what you're going to do, they have opened it up again. What they have done, they have slowed down the speed so that people can't transmit images.
Right.
Can
Okay.
I just respond to that very briefly?
Please do.
Thank you very much for agreeing, but ultimately you did argue with the point that this technology was significant and useful. I was speaking from the perspective of a correspondent who was working with that material. My producer is here with me too. The two of us would pore over it, and there was so much. We were spoilt for choice. It was coming in from all sorts of different sources. We were able to conduct interviews over Skype. We were able to download pictures from the web. We were able to use a whole array of different internet news networks that were operating in Burma with their own citizen reporter correspondents on the ground. And then, of course, there was the DVB source and other picture sources coming out of Burma. So I would say don't underestimate just how powerful that sort of technology can be in allowing us to report accurately, more accurately, what is going on inside.
Yeah, just a couple of sentences, and then we'll go to another question.
It's all right. I'm not damning the internet technology. What I'm saying is that it's not the thing. That
It's not the revolution. It's not bringing on the revolution.
I was in Burma during '88. The reporting from the Western world in '88 was far much better than what was reported in rolling news days.
What, because it was less hyped?
No,
You mean because in September?
It was less hyped. As Jonathan says, it's so easy to report what is happening. You see, in '88, what happened? Christopher Gunnis, who's not here tonight, he did a fantastic reporting. I think he's one of the heroes of '88. What he did was that he actually employed someone inside Burma, and all these journalists from the world, they went inside Burma, they were reporting what was happening. What Christopher Gunnis was doing, he was actually reporting what was happening with the junta, what was happening behind the scene, how much bankrupt the government was, and all sorts of things that you can't actually pick it up from apparent reporting, is it?
Okay, thank you very much.
And I think even more famously than that, and Christopher Gunnis did a fantastic job, was that through a very interesting situation in 88-89 where you had a press officer at the British Embassy who now works for the BBC, or was working for the BBC, who was feeding stuff through to the BBC about upcoming rallies and so forth, and where Suu Kyi would be on this day and that day. And that had a very, very active input into the narrative of events. So I kind of agree with you that we shouldn't exaggerate what's been happening. It's been very useful for our nighttime TV shows and breakfast newspapers. I'd be very interested to know from you or somebody how much that stuff was being fed back constructively into Burma. Who can answer that?
Can I have another quick go at this? Well, I mean,
yeah.
look, the one problem with those sorts of open sources is that they're very difficult to corroborate. You don't quite know what you're getting, and it's very, very hard to verify the information. So, despite what I said earlier about the fact that the traditional foreign correspondent is becoming almost less important, there is still a very, very important role for the eyewitness on the ground, the observer. This correspondent that Channel 4 News had inside performed a crucial role in not only reporting what was happening in Rangoon during the demonstrations, but following up on specific reports. You may remember, you mentioned the raids on the monasteries, the particular one in northeast Rangoon early one morning. Another report was the Tamway Township School in which children were shot at, among others. Now, this correspondent, actually, if you'll forgive me, he did write to me tonight, knowing what was happening here, and he made a few comments, some of which I'd like to read out, if I may.
Do, yeah, quickly, yeah.
He said, you know, some of it is very obvious, but what I find interesting about it is it does reflect very accurately what it is like to work on the ground as a correspondent inside. During the time of the crackdown, he writes, we found ourselves in a totally bizarre situation. We were following the story but pretending that we weren't. It was an utterly unique situation. We were there looking like badly dressed tourists, and he comments on the guy from the Telegraph in particular, and he said we were heading into the thick of it armed with copies of Lonely Planet. And he'd never gone to war, he said, into war essentially armed with a Lonely Planet and Ray-Bans. Now, the thing was, he says, there were not very many foreigners around, so we stood out and shooting material on the streets carried risks. One cameraman he knew was badly beaten up, others were stopped and threatened. But most of all, he says, it was the risks of identifying those who worked with us. And this has been traditionally the great problem facing journalists on the ground. It was the problem in the mid-90s. A friend of mine who worked for ABC Australia did a report in which two, not dissident, but NLD workers were filmed and later identified, despite efforts with one of them to conceal their identity. They were sentenced to 7 years in jail. It was later increased. They're now out, and this correspondent has been back and met them. Aung San Suu Kyi has said that these, you know, it is not, the Burmese do not shoot the messenger. They fully understand that there are calculated risks that must be taken. And if people do choose to speak to journalists who are standing there with cameras, or clearly Western reporters in there doing their jobs, if people speak to them, they know the risks, and there is a price to pay.
At the back there, yes.
How important is Aung San Suu Kyi? Sorry, how important is Aung San Suu Kyi? Is there anybody else? Suppose Aung San Suu Kyi doesn't exist anymore. Is there anybody else? How important is she as a figure?
And perhaps we could enlarge on that question, because some people have suggested that actually suggested to me that obviously she's seen as this great saintly figure who can't be questioned. I mean, maybe we could just enlarge on that and say, well, is she is it, if we're allowed to say this, is she in some way a barrier? Is there a problem that she is causing you know, a blockage in something that could be done there? Tuin, what would you say?
Oh yes, she is very important, but she is actually the embodiment of the people's wishes. I've got to tell you two aspects of the recent uprising, which I noted during the talk at LSE. One is well, all of you know that the monks, pausing in front of the Aung San Suu Kyi house, and it makes you wonder why these monks, walking in the rain and the sun, why do they decide to go to in front of the house of Aung San Suu Kyi? And then also the second thing is rarely noted in the Western media. This is the slogans that people shouted. One of them is the "May people's wishes be fulfilled." I mean, it tells you a lot. I mean, if you put these two, the slogans of the people and the decision of the monks, going in front of the Aung San Suu Kyi house, if you put these two in the context, what you see is the role of Aung San Suu Kyi. It shouldn't be underestimated, and also because the entire cause for the opposition hinges on the 1990 election, and when you talk about the 1990 election, which is the only election ever held in the past 60 years, let's say, and the only free and fair election held in the past 60 years, and they are the NLD is the winner, and the Aung San Suu Kyi is the clear choice of the people, and I mean, so I mean, I can't really answer whether the democratic reform by the government would be successful without Aung San Suu Kyi, which they think, they hope, which they think. But I don't think that hope is based on the illusion, I think.
So without her there, things would be much worse. For instance, when her husband was dying, she decided she was not going to leave because they wouldn't let her back in.
They must, any political reform for Burma must include Aung San Suu Kyi, because she is the only one. I mean, ask Zora, who more or less represent the ethnic nationalities. But she is the only person in the past 60, 70 years who won the trust of not only the ordinary Burmese citizens, but also widely the armed ceasefire groups, although they did not explicitly speak, but ask the KNU and the ceasefire groups and
Justin, do you agree?
Sort of. I mean, I think more and more thinking about Aung San Suu Kyi, I think she's a terrific moral figurehead, moral authority. And in a strange way, I think she's already changed Burma for the better. I, like others, I mean, I'm a historian, so I look at the shape of narratives, and I wonder sometimes whether her political judgment is always so good. I mean, we've talked just now about her not leaving Burma either before her husband's death or after it, when the regime was still saying to her that she was free to leave if she didn't come back. Now, the fact that she stayed and she made that incredibly difficult choice to not go back to her family, her sons, but to stay in Burma, I mean, that was magnificent as a moral statement and as a statement of solidarity with her people. On the other hand, she could have left Burma. She could have done a Yasser Arafat, gone to the United Nations, whipped up a lot of support for the democratic movement at a time when interest in it was tailing off. Again, she seems not just her, but other members of the NLD leadership have not been particularly thoughtful about bringing on a younger generation of the NLD as new leaders. And that takes us back to the question of who are the on-the-ground leaders at the moment. And you go back to the Generation 88 students, Kokoji, Minko Naing, and in practical terms, although they're in prison now, of course, again, I see these people as being as really being quite forceful. So I think it's very important that Suu Kyi's position as a moral figure, as a moral authority, as an iconic figure, is actually preserved. Should the dream happen, should the regime collapse or hand over power, and it would probably be in stages, and that Suu Kyi was released, allowed to play a role in the thing, and there were elections and so forth, I think it'd be terribly important that she assumed a presidential role, but did not get too involved in the daily running of politics, because she's not got the experience for that now. I mean, she's so I do have reservations about her political student, I have no reservations about her moral character.
Can I just ask you one question? Do you know how many NLD offices are allowed to open in Burma? Since the how many NLD offices are allowed to open in Burma?
Now?
Yes, I mean since let's say it's 1996, where the one in 2003. How many NLD offices do you think? I mean, because you're saying the NLD were unable to bring up the new generation. I mean,
you say they are
because they were not allowed to operate as a political party.
Well, that's right.
I mean, this, you can't just dismiss this point easily. They were passing through a very difficult time. They have to. I mean, they're finding it very difficult. They're struggling to exist as a political party. I think. So yeah.
No, but I mean, if you look for the younger, who are the younger leaders, you say Kokoji, you say Min Ko Nai.
Oh yeah. I mean, they liaise with each other. I mean, the 88 generation.
Can we just move on to another question? Actually, thank you. Yes, here at the front.
There have been some stories about the security services, members of security services deserting and fleeing Burma because they felt guilty about how the monks were treated, and they were worried about their bad karma, etc. Given how highly revered monks are in Buddhist culture and in Burma, how significant is the discontent in security services about the treatment of monks? And could that possibly lead to change from within? So maybe another coup, or an overthrow, and maybe some improvement in the situation in Burma.
Anyone want to?
Yes. But actually, that was I wrote an article for in Burmese for Burmese internet magazine, exactly raising the point you're making now, because the monasteries has been performing the functional equivalent of social welfare in Burma. I mean, they were able to open the primary school. They can arrange the patients who were taking treatment in Rangoon and Mandalay, and as the time goes from better to worse, their capabilities, their roles were expanded. So when they were attacked, when they were undermined, I mean, it could have the significant consequences in the society, because they've been, because of their privileged position, because of their revered positions, they were able to do lots of good for the society. But then, and I think that's what I want to point out. When the monasteries are undermined, I mean they could arrange the funeral plan, but there's no. The people are so poor that they can't even afford the funeral.
What about the military? The fact that the military were ordered to shoot the monks, is that in some way? Do you think that could create an anger within the military that could turn on the rulers in any way?
Well, I feel this whole September Saffron Revolution, as it was called, was absolutely about testing the Tatmadaw and the divided loyalties of the ordinary soldiers between loyalty to their officers and loyalty to Burmese culture, to the Buddhists, Sangha, and so forth. And this time round, I mean, we know what happened in Rangoon, where battle-hardened troops were brought in from where they'd been fighting your people from Karen State, and there clearly were troops who refused to fight, including officers, etc., and there had been recriminations and sackings and so forth.
So there is
and
something.
that's what it was about. That is why I said that had 80% of the monks come out, and that's a big ask, because we know that it's a big ask there.
Right.
But I have a horrible hunch that had a lot more monks come out, then we might be in a more rejoiceful mood today.
Johnny,
well, my take on this is that the generals overplayed their hand massively in what they did in shooting monks and rounding them up as they did. The monks have traditionally always in Burmese culture played an arbitrating role, mediating between the people and their rulers, and their presence on these demonstrations in September and August gave ordinary people a sense of hope that they would be protected when they themselves rose up. You're right, there were long rumours that troops in Rangoon had refused to shoot on monks, which is why those fighting ethnic insurgencies elsewhere were drafted in. Recently, interviews were done for Channel 4 News, which proved this point. Also, when I was in Thailand, I'd interviewed a Burmese army defector, a colonel, who came out because of this very reason. It is what motivated his own departure. He could not handle it to see the monks being treated in this way. And I think it has a massive impact, and I think they've really cocked up doing it.
Time for a couple more questions. Yes, lady over here.
I just wondered if anybody could elaborate slightly on the current status today. Has there been a tightening up for the people who live in Burma today in daily life? Have things changed at all because of what's happened recently in terms of demonstrations? And I know nobody's got a crystal ball, but what is the immediate future looking like?
Well,
So, yes, why not? Yeah.
Okay.
Has it changed since the demonstrations? What's life like inside?
Well, the protests, the demonstrations may have ended on the street, but the underground network protests still happening, like activists. They are in hiding area and they deliver leaflets, and leaflets like giving informations about how to mobilize new kind of wave of the protest. Things like that is still happen, and the crackdown on activists happen every day, and the arrest and the raids of these peaceful protesters who were involved in the past, in last month, 2 months ago protest, and anyone who the regime suspects got arrested, and they face torture and brutality in the prison every day, and this kind of thing that we've seen on the televisions, on the screen, that's the brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters. And the killing, the shooting happen every day in ethnic area. And we have to remember that over 40% in Burma are ethnic people who are mostly on the border, because they are so much oppressed by the regime. They have been oppressed for so long. But international community, I'm so disappointed to see that people do not pay enough attention to these suffering people. Instead, they blame these people as they are the victim of the military rule in Burma.
And the crystal ball, if you could look into the next year or so, you're talking about the couple of months, you're talking about an organization that is still there within Burmese society.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the possibility of demonstrations again? And one crucial question I have is, how important is the economy in all of this? I mean, the economy seems to have been crucial in '88 and again this year in just tripping the switch or lighting the fuse. How do you see the next few months going?
Okay, I can assure you that Buddhist monks and people in Burma will not give up, and we will continue the struggle until we win back our freedom, our basic human rights and democracy. And people inside Burma, they are always delivering leaflets through the underground networks in the hiding area, despite the regime's crackdown on them at night or in daytime. And people, Burmese people outside world like us, we bring information out, we facilitate the communication channels, and then these Burmese people, they want to make sure that this generation is the last generation who suffer under this military dictatorship, and the next generation should live in peace without fear, like we all do here. And in the next few months' times, we can't say that there won't be another uprising. It can happen anytime, as people are still angry at the regime.
Do we have a feeling? Other people, sorry to interrupt, just because we need to wrap it up. Anyone else have a feeling?
I'd just like to say one thing.
Just briefly.
To answer your question about things. My sources say that the uprising was sparked by the hike in oil prices, just economic hardship. After September the 27th, a lot of people lost their jobs. Businesses went bust. A lot of people were put on half pay. Hotel occupancy rates went down 15 or 10%. So the upshot of it was that there's even more economic hardship. And that makes it very unstable.
There's a problem. I'm not being cynical about the sanctions or whatever. I mean, you might have known, one of your sources might say that one of the immediate effects of the uprising is that the commodity prices, or the prices of the fish, let's say the tiger prawns, the catfish, actually go down. Do you know the reason? The reason is that the reason you haven't heard that because your sources didn't tell me, but our sources tell us. This is easily reported that the reason is that these tiger prawns or the catfish or all these delicacies which are not being seen in the Burmese people dinner were bought en masse by the hotels to cater for the tourists and also to export to the Shadwell, to the Bangladeshi fish merchants. So these businesses, you're quite right that these businesses were disrupted. So they have to sell to the local with the reduced price. And
there's always somebody who would benefit.
Oh yeah, of course. Economic difficulties.
Plus a negative.
If you had to, in one line, summarize how you see the next few months going, over the next year, how do you think it looks?
Well, I would be surprised, if things ended just like that. I mean, the suppression, so violent, it left so much scar and so much resentment in the people's mind, and it's so difficult to imagine it would just end it like that. I mean, this is not. I mean, you know the David Steinberg, who is from the Georgetown University. He was. I was just echoing what he said. We had an interview with him. He said he'd
be surprised if it
that's
okay.
Okay,
one line each, quickly.
A few lines. I would like to point out that 90% of the population already lived under the poverty lines. So when the regime increased the food prices up to 500%, followed by the increase of the price in commodity prices, it makes so much hardship for the people to live. And this suffer and the extreme poverty is caused because of the mismanagement of the economic policy by the regime, but it is not because of the economic sanction. Burmese people want economic sanction.
Okay, Johnny, one line.
I don't think the Burmese people should expect too much of the United Nations. I don't think they will deliver. I don't think they can. I don't think ASEAN will deliver, despite the appointment of Sirin Pitsuwan as Secretary General just today or yesterday. I think that China does hold a key position in what happens in the future. If indeed there is a groundswell for keeping this momentum going for continued civil disobedience, keep your eye on the 20th anniversary of the 88 uprising. It happens to coincide exactly with the opening of the Beijing Olympics.
That's not a very optimistic summary, I have to say. Have we got time for one more question, or we've got to wrap it up there? Okay, it is a very worrying summary, and I think that there are obviously great causes for concern when we look at the UN or ASEAN or whoever it is outside, or the limited sanctions that are being applied. So I know we're all going to continue to watch the situation in Burma. I'm sure the Chinese will be watching it on the 8th of August next year, as we all will. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Justin Wintle, Twin Jozo, and Zoya Pan and Johnny Miller. And thank you all for coming and for your questions. Thank you very much indeed.